All right, joining me now, our former federal prosecutor and current chair of the Criminal Justice Department at the University of New Haven, Robert Sanders, and also Dominic Romano, founding partner of a law firm specializing in media law. And Dominic, we got you back now, so I want to get you online first here. First, let's go back to the question I asked you before, because I was interested in your answer as to how you thought generally the defense did today, and then we'll get into some specifics.
They did better. But again, as Representative Stacey Plaskett said, this is not about one speech, right? This is not about one statement or a series of statements where people have used the word fight before. I mean, Russia, if you're listening, the president has, unfortunately for him, a history of speaking in code. And he could have stepped in. Once the violence has started, he's the commander in chief. He has access to intelligence. Instead of, speaking to people who are wearing his colors, wearing his name on their heads, in their flags, asking them to retreat or to stop. He does nothing. He does nothing. He waits until much later, and then he makes a statement. And so, again, the clip you just played, he had an opportunity to come today and this week to defend himself, to explain his mindset. He did not do that, and I think we should consider that.
Robert, I always thought it made no sense for him to come here. At the end of the day, this is about what the House impeachment managers say he did. For him to come there, I thought would have been a real problem. I want to get your opinion. Do you think it was a good idea that he stood away from these proceedings, or could he have helped himself?
Well, the question on the table was, what did the president know about the danger to Mike Pence, and when did he know it? What did he do about it? And what were the aftermath of that action or inaction? And do they tell a tale of his motives and intent? I think if that was answered, the president would have to stand up and tell us under oath what he thought. The president doesn't want to give those answers.
Yeah, that's something that I think he probably would want to stay away from. Now, Dominic, what's interesting is the defense made what I thought was a salient point. Yesterday, Mike Lee stood up and he explained how something that was quoted in a newspaper article about something he said wasn't true. He had never said it. And I think today, the defense jumped on this idea that a lot of the House manager's case relied upon reports from newspapers and things of that nature. Now, we know that the Trump people who support some of his ideals, don't like the media. So it was a really good partisan argument for them. But I also think it was a good point, just in general, because this stuff, that kind of evidence would not have been allowed in a regular trial. So do you think it was folly to rely so much on that type of evidence?
You mean, are you talking about media evidence?
Yeah, they relied on a lot of what they said he knew or did were based on media reports from newspapers and things they saw in the media.
Right, but those reports were based on sources, right? People in the president's circle, presumably. At the end of the day, again, come back to Representative Stacey Plaskett's comment. This is not just about that one speech. It's about the words. You played the clip earlier. He talked about a fighter, a boxer, like fighting with one hand tied behind his back. He mocked people being nice. After plenty of misinformation about voter suppression, of which there's no evidence in this election, he stands up there. He encourages people to fight. And when they start fighting, when presumably he hears about it, he starts tweeting negative commentary about his vice president who's being hunted down. I think all of that is relevant, even if you look at the president's own words, going back to the 2016 election, when he was encouraging protesters or hecklers to be punched in the mouth. If you look at that highway scene where basically he was encouraging people to driving a bus of an opposing campaign off of the highway or steering it off the highway. I mean, it's not just about one comment. It's the whole body of commentary here.
You know what's interesting, Robert, is one of the arguments they make is that creating this opportunity to impeach people once they're out of office is sort of a slippery slope. And we see this argument in so many different contexts. The idea that if you can impeach someone once they're out of office, what's to stop people from impeaching just about anyone? I mean, even at one point, Bruce Castor mentioned we could impeach Abraham Lincoln the way it's going in this sense. I want to get your opinion on this, the idea that by allowing impeachment under these circumstances, are you creating an exception that really is a slippery slope? And considering the political climate now, could really lead to a lot more impeachments in the future?
I'm going to say no, because impeachment as a political process is still difficult. And if you even look at the Belknap case, which is one of the ones that's been cited through here, Belknap tried to quit before he could be impeached. In fact, he did resign. He was still impeached and not allowed to serve in office again. So this process of looking at it now as a new slippery slope is a red herring in my mind.
All right. And Dominic, I also thought the argument regarding due process was an interesting one. Now, I know the Constitution doesn't seem to supply any sort of due process. It could be implied, of course, by the Fifth Amendment or the 14th, depending on which one you want to go with. But at the end of the day, their argument was the president deserves more due process. They didn't investigate. They didn't take their time. What do you say about that argument?
Well, if you look at the history of impeachment, I agree with the comment just made. It's so rare. It's happened so rarely in our country. You have to do something really egregious to be impeached once, let alone twice. So, I mean, look, the events of January 6th are well known. The evidence is there. The speech is there. The history of the comments, the lack of stepping up and quelling the violence after it started is there. Is there tacit approval? Is there incitement? The FBI seems to think that there was an insurrection, the cases that they're building in court. But the question then is, who lit the flame? Who started it? Who encouraged it? And there was someone that had an ability, someone that might have had a responsibility, calling back people who were wearing his colors, who were wearing his hats to stop. That did not happen until a lot of the damage was done.
You know, a lot of the argument, Robert, that they were making was lodged in this idea that the speech that he made that day, and they kept focusing on that day. They weren't really speaking too much to the sort of broader issues there and the totality of what the House managers were sort of bringing in terms of the things he had done to lead up to that day. But on that day, they were claiming that those words were protected by the First Amendment and don't meet the Brandenburg test as we know it. I'd love to get your opinion on that.
Well, I don't agree with that. Donald Trump in an insurgency, if this is an insurgency, is the charismatic leader of the insurgency. And his words from well before the 6th started the narrative that we ended up with violence, political violence at the Capitol. So if you're going to now say that this one piece of his commentary should be expunged from all the other comments that were directed toward violence from 2005 toward now, I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think that's realistic when you're talking about an insurgency. Insurgencies build over time. There's a narrative that is laid out. The narrative in this case was they stole the election and all of the people on the other side, i.e. the non-Trumpers, are evil and they're taking away your America. That rhetoric was dangerous when he first started it, coming down the elevator in his rallies, and it was dangerous to a mob full of 7 groups of white supremacists, anti-American insurgents on the 6th of January.
Yeah. You know, Dominic, one of the arguments, again, made by the defense, and we're sort of ticking them off here, is that the pre-planning played into the hands of the defense, and that, you know, if they were already pre-planning it, then really, obviously, the president wasn't the one that incited them to do this. But I think that's a double-edged sword. What do you say about that pre-planning aspect of it? Can that be used on both sides, and who has the stronger argument?
I absolutely agree that it can be used on both sides. But look, the president warned that something special would be happening. You know, he had presumably access to intelligence. You heard the former director talk about, and one of the anchors from the clip talk about a war that would be waged by protesters. So instead of advocating or pressing for peaceful protesting, he's talking about not fighting with one hand tied behind your back. He's talking about mocking being nice. So the pre-planning is something to take into consideration. If you're the commander in chief and you have knowledge that there could be violence, and you go out and make a fiery speech and you say, go out there and march and I'll be there with you, and then you stand back and maybe watch it on video listening to Gloria, then you might be impeached again.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think, again, the strongest part of the House manager's case was his inaction after. Once he knew what was going on, not doing anything about it spoke volumes, I thought. All right, gentlemen, please stand by. We do have to take a quick break right now as we're coming to the bottom of the hour. But when we come back, we're going to take a Court TV close-up look at how the former president's attorneys poked holes in the case made by House prosecutors, specifically by calling into question their use of media reports to support parts of their case. That's coming up after the break. Stay with us here on Court TV.